Chapter 11, Aggregate Planning and Master Scheduling. Good evening. This is Ken Clark. This is Ferris State University at the Macomb campus, Management 370, Spring 2020 semester. We're supposed to be in room S101. We meet Wednesdays 6 to 8:50 p.m. This is our third to the last session. This is Management 370 ERA, Quality Operations Management. This is week 11 of 16, April 1st, 2020. I'd like to welcome you here. Sorry that I can't take any questions, comments, or discussions other than through Canvas. Reminder, summer 2020 registration opened back on January 20th. Again, make sure you do a consortium form if you're taking community college classes at either Macomb or at Oakland. Fall 2020 registration opened on Monday, March 30th, 2020. If you have not registered for classes, I encourage you to do so right away. Reminder, if you don't visit your My Degree frequently, you ought to. Think of it as your bank account. And the quicker you can find something that needs to be fixed, the quicker we can make it right. Tonight, this first session will be Chapter 11, Aggregate Planning and Master Scheduling. I have graded the independent researches that I've received so far, and when you get your quiz, you'll see that on page 498, the case, 8 glasses a day, egad, will be, I'll give you the long answer to that. And your answers would have had to be in by then anyways. So I'm going to go ahead with Chapter 11, Aggregate Planning and Master Scheduling. On page 463, aggregate planning is intermediate range capacity planning that typically covers a time horizon of 2 to 12 months. Although in some companies it may extend to as much as 18 months. It is particularly useful for organizations that experience seasonal or other fluctuations in demand or capacity. Sales and operational planning is intermediate range decisions to balance supply and demand, integrating financial and operations planning. And then finally on page 463, some organizations do use the term sales and operational planning instead of aggregate planning for intermediate range planning. Similarly, sales and operation planning is defined as making intermediate range decisions to balance supply and demand, integrating financial and operations planning. On page 464, intermediate planning and perspective. Organizations make capacity decisions on 3 levels: long-term, intermediate term, and short-term capacity decisions. Many business organizations develop a business plan that encompasses both long-term and intermediate-term planning. If some of you plan to go into business for yourself, banks quite often still will require a business plan. On page 465, the aggregate plan will guide the more detailed planning that eventually leads to a master schedule. In fact, I believe one or more of you may be the master scheduler at your facility. The concept of aggregation on page 465. Aggregate planning is essentially a big picture approach to planning. Planners usually try to avoid focusing on individual products or services unless the organization has only one major product or service. Big picture. On page 466, generally speaking, aggregate planning is connected to the budgeting process. A key issue in aggregate planning is how to handle variations. And that's really true in any business, whether it be manufacturing or service, is dealing with variation. Dealing with variations. Most organizations use rolling 3, 6, 9, and 12-month forecasts that are updated periodically rather than relying on a once-a-year forecast. If we were live, I'd be asking, why is that? And you would say, well, because there's not enough predictability a year out. So you're making changes every 3 months and sometimes less. Page 466 at the bottom, an overview of aggregate planning. Aggregate planning begins with a forecast of aggregated demand for the intermediate range. Starts with the intermediate, not short or long. Top of page 467, demand and strategy. Aggregate planners are concerned with the quantity and the timing of expected demand. Quantity and timing. We always said that in manufacturing. If you tell me what to make and when to make it, I got a chance of being successful. Just need to know how many you're going to need. I just washed my hands, so when I put my hands to my mouth, even though it's not right, my hands are clean, and I'm home alone currently. On page 468, demand options. Demand options include pricing, promotions, using back orders or delayed order filling, and creating new demand. So those are really the demand options you need to consider when putting together your plan. On page 469, supply options. Supply options include hiring, laying off workers, overtime, slack time, part-time or temporary workers, inventories, and subcontractors. The company I worked for is kind of nice. It was aerospace. We always said, if we hire you, we're going to do everything we can to keep you. Because number one, you probably gave up a good job to come to us. And if we lay you off, you're probably going to give up a good job to go somewhere else. So our mission was, if we hire you, keep you. And that's a good employer. On page 471, under level capacity strategy, maintaining a steady rate of regular time output while meeting variations in demands by a combination of options is level capacity strategy. And we all kind of like to do that in any kind of business. Even me as a charter captain, I would love to have one charter every other day. However, I'll have 3 a day for 3 days in a row and then nothing for 3 days. So level capacity strategy. We don't all have the luxury of that, but we can still sometimes plan for that. Sometimes you can work ahead. On page 473, choosing a strategy. Whatever strategy an organization is considering, 3 important factors are company policy, flexibility, and cost. Company policy, flexibility, and cost. On page 474, numerous techniques are available to help with the task of aggregate planning. Generally, they fall into one of 2 categories: informal, trial and error techniques, and mathematical techniques. So informal, depending on the size of your business, versus mathematical techniques. Interestingly enough, some of these are kind of complicated, and I was going over it with one of my sons. He said, "Dad, that's what I do for a living." So it was kind of interesting. Some of the techniques. Trial and error techniques using graphs and spreadsheets. Trial and error approaches consist of developing simple tables or graphs that enable planners to visually compare projected demand requirements with existing capacity. How much do we think we're going to sell? How much can we make? Not quite the strategy, but it's something. On page 476, in practice, successful achievement of a good plan depends on the resourcefulness and persistence of the planner. So your planner makes a big difference. I think a lot of you know that from the facilities that you may work at, both in manufacturing and the service sector. On page 478, mathematical techniques. A number of mathematical techniques have been developed to handle aggregate planning. They range from mathematical programming models to heuristic and computer search models. This section briefly describes some of the better known techniques. They start out with linear programming. They talk about simulation models. A simulation model is a computerized model that can be tested under different scenarios to identify acceptable solutions to problems. Basically, what if? What if this happens? What if all of a sudden this happens? I don't think anybody in their simulation model said, hey, what if we get the coronavirus in 2020? Some things you can't plan for, like tsunamis. Not a lot of people plan for tsunamis, but they happen. Bottom of page 481, aggregate planning and services. Remember, a big part of this class is not only manufacturing, but service and international. Aggregate planning for services takes into account projected customer demands, equipment capacities, and labor capabilities. The resulting plan is a time-phase projection of service staff requirements. So again, services in a simulation model. On page 483, yield management. Yield management is an approach that seeks to maximize revenue by using a strategy of variable pricing. Prices are set relative to capacity availability. Thus, during periods of low demand, price discounts are offered to attract a wider population. And I think we've all seen that. It's cheaper to go to dinner sometimes during certain hours. It's cheaper to go to a movie during a matinee. It's cheaper to use services. I live in Whitehall, which is just south of Ludington. What Ludington does is they pump water from Lake Michigan all night long to their power plant when electricity is cheaper. And then what they do is they drain it back into Lake Michigan during the day, where they can make enough money, even if it's 3 cents a kilowatt hour that they're making. They're doing it over so many kilowatts that it's actually, they generate a lot more money than they spend doing the pumping during the evening. I bet you didn't know that. All right, on page 483 toward the bottom. The result of disaggregating the aggregate plan is a master production schedule, MPS, or simply master schedule, showing the quantities and timing of specific end items for a scheduled horizon, which often covers about 6 to 8 weeks ahead. A master production schedule or master schedule. Many of you in manufacturing are familiar with that. On page 485, toward the top, once a tentative master schedule has been developed, it must be validated. This is an extremely important step. Validation is referred to as a rough cut capacity planning, rough cut RCCP. It involves testing the feasibility of a proposed master schedule relative to available capacities to assure that no obvious capacity constraint exists. Boy, if we make that many, we can't get them through heat treat, milling, whatever operation. Boy, if we did have 1,000 customers come in, take advantage of that 2 p.m. dinner, we wouldn't be able to handle them anyways. So again, rough cut capacity planning. On page 485, time fences. Changes to a master schedule can be disruptive, particularly changes to the early or near portions of the schedule. Typically, the further out in the future a change is, the less the tendency to cause problems. However, if you're planning on a lot of people to the beach and all of a sudden it starts really raining the day before, you really didn't plan for that. You had all your people coming in. So in those instances, time fences divide a scheduling time horizon into 3 sections or phases, sometimes referred to as frozen, slushy, and liquid. Time fences, frozen, slushy, and liquid. So kind of a neat analogy there. On page 486, outputs. The master scheduling process uses this information on a period-by-period basis to determine the projected inventory, production requirements, and the resulting uncommitted inventory, which is referred to as available to promise ATP inventory. Available to promise inventory. All right, on page 498 is our case study, 8 glasses a day, EGAD. The questions are, the objective is to choose the plan that has the lowest cost. Which plan would you recommend? And presumably, information about the new line has been shared with supply chain partners. Explain what information should be shared with various partners and why sharing that information is important. You will have submitted that to me by the time this gets released. Okay. The next thing we're going to be doing is Chapter 12 on MRP and ERP. I will have looked at your independent research, and you will have done page 545, case promotional novelties. Actually, some people did both, thank you. But really the assignment was all you had to do was either page 498, case 8 classes a day, or page 545, case promotional novelties. All right, well, at the end of this evening, you'll be seeing quiz number 2 over chapters 6 through 12. Our next meeting will be week 13 of 16 on April 15th, 2020. We'll be going over chapter 13, inventory management, chapter 14, just-in-time and lean operations, and one of my favorites, chapter 14, supplement, strictly on maintenance. I will have looked at your independent researches, and the case studies we'll be doing for that session are the case study on page 600, UPD manufacturing, and case on page 641, level operations. If I see a lot of people getting the same questions wrong, I will review those questions of quiz number 2 over chapter 6 through 12 when we meet again on April 15th. Alrighty, so that takes us through chapter 11, aggregate planning and master scheduling. If you don't get the quiz, which there's like 3 of you, I think have a hard time, or did, for the last one, had a hard time with your Ferris email. For those of you, we will in fact, or if you email me, I will send it to a different email address, but that will be your responsibility. All right, again, this is Ken Clark at Ferris State University, Management 370, ERA, Quality Operations Management. I wish you and your family all a very healthy and safe time with this pandemic going on. And very shortly, I will be doing our next chapter, chapter 12, MRP and ERP. All righty, with that, thank you. Okay, goodbye.